Welcome to Module 1, Lesson 22, Getting the Job Done, Speed, Work, and Measurement Units. So after today's lesson, I would like you to be able to decontextualize a given speed situation, representing symbolically the quantities involved with the formula distance equals rate times time. So what I'm asking you to do is break down the problem and be able to represent it in quantities in terms of the distance formula rate times time. Alright, so first we're going to think about some different questions here. I want you to think of how many seconds are there in 1 minute. And we should know that there are 60 seconds in 1 minute. And then how do we verbalize this relationship? So I just said there are 60 seconds in 1 minute. So we can say it that way. There are 60 seconds in 1 minute. We can also say for every 60 seconds there is 1 minute. Okay, so going back to ratios and thinking about how we talked about representing different ratios and saying different ratios, or we can say for every 1 minute there is or are 60 seconds. Right, so if we look at it this way, if I represent it using a rate, I could put it this way. So if I said 60 seconds over 1 minute, or even without the 1 in it, would that be the same as putting the 60 out in front and then just putting the label seconds over minute? Right, so if you look at this, and we want to know if they're the same, you have to think about this line here and how we know that it's per. And we know that this 60, if we read it as a sentence, it would go 60 seconds per minute. Well, we talked about per and for every being words that we use to represent ratios and being kind of the same words. So if we had 60 seconds per minute, would that be the same thing as saying 60 seconds for every 1 minute? Since they would be the same thing, we know that these two things are the same because it's the same thing here, 60 seconds per minute or 60 seconds for every minute. So if we pull the 60 out, it doesn't really make it, it doesn't make it different. It's just a different way of visualizing it. So what we're going to do, we're actually going to skip example 1 and we're going to go to example 2. And we're going to look at Chris Johnson, who ran the 40-yard dash in 4 24/100 seconds. And we want to know what is the rate of speed. And we're going to round our answer to the nearest hundredth. So here, he ran the 40-yard dash in that many seconds. What is the rate of speed? Now, we said that we wanted to use a distance formula of distance equals rate times time. Okay, but now, since we have different pieces here, we might have to change that formula a little bit. All right, let's start off by writing our sentence. So our sentence would be, Chris Johnson's rate of speed was blank. So since we want rate of speed, that R is right here. And since that's what we're looking for, we can rearrange our formula in order to make a formula that will work for us. Otherwise, we can plug in for distance and time and work backwards for rate. So let's see how it would work changing our formula around. So instead, what I could do is, in order to get rid of the time, because I want rate by itself, I could divide both sides by time, which tells me that distance divided by time would give me my rate, which is what I'm looking for here. All right, so I know that 4 and 2400 seconds is going to be important, and that 40 yards is going to be important. Since it's 40 yards, that's going to be our distance. So we're going to take our distance of 40 yards and divide it by our time of 4 and 2400 seconds. Okay, and then we can use our calculator here and actually figure that out. So we take the 40 and divide it by the 4 and 2400. And this is the answer we get, but we're rounding to the hundredths. So I know that it is approximately 9 and 43 hundredths. Now, I can't cancel either of these out, so it would be 9 and 43 hundredths yards per second, which would make sense because since it's a rate, we should be comparing two different things. So my answer here would be Chris Johnson's rate of speed was 9 and 43 hundredths yards per second. Okay, so let's go on to part 2. In part 2, in lesson 21, we converted units of measure using unit rates. So we're going to use that again. So we're going to use what we learned in lesson 21 here in lesson 22. So if the runner were able to run at a constant rate is important, means no matter what point of the race they're in, they're running at the same speed. And that speed we said was 9 and 43 hundredths yards per second. How many yards would he run in an hour? So we want to know how many yards in an hour means 1 hour. Okay, so now I didn't have any information here, so here's this lesson 21. That's not important to us. I actually need to go back into part 1 and use this answer to help me figure out the answer to this next part. So I know that his rate of speed is 9 and 43 hundredths yards per second. Okay, then I also need to write my sentence, so I make sure I'm looking for the correct thing. So Chris would have run blank yards in 1 minute. So when we answer at the end, our answer should just be in minutes. Well, I know since this is my rate that I'm using to convert, and I'm using an hour, so I'm using 1 hour. So I want to take that 1 hour and multiply it by my rate of speed. But now the thing is here, because it's an hour and I'm working with seconds, I have to work my way up to that answer. So I know that 1 minute is equal to 60 seconds. So I'm going to use, and I'm using seconds because I have seconds here. So I'm using that change. So 9 and 43 hundredths, and we're going to do yards per second, and we're going to multiply it by that 60 seconds to figure out how many yards we would go in 1 minute, because I can't go to hours yet because I don't have a conversion between seconds and hours. I know seconds and seconds cancel each other out, and then when I multiply here, I'm just going to do the multiplication for you, I get 565 and 80 hundredths yards. Okay, so I know that in 1 minute, Chris would have run 565 and 80 hundredths or 8/10 yards in 1 minute. So I took my rate and multiplied it by 60 seconds to turn it into 1 minute, because I have to break it down into 2 steps. I have to go seconds to minutes and then minutes to hours, because I know the conversion for seconds to minutes, and I also know the conversion for minutes to hours. Right, so in the next step, I'm going to use my answer from part A to figure out, it's asking me here, how many yards would he run in 1 hour? So 1 being my important number. How many yards? in 1 hour. So I know that my answer should be in yards. So Chris would have run blank yards in 1 hour. So now I'm going to use my answer from before, which was a rate of 565 and 0.80 yards per minute. And I'm going to multiply that by 60 again because I know that there are 60 minutes in 1 hour. So I'm going to put the 60 over 1 because it is a whole number. Again, my minutes and my minutes are going to cancel out. And when I multiply here, I get 33,948 yards. Okay, so in 1 hour, Chris would have run 33,948 yards. Again, since this is a two-step process, you want to take the time, figure out your conversion, or figure out that connecting piece. So the connecting piece in this point was using minutes to connect seconds to hours. And then that two-step process of multiplying it by your rate by your conversion factor and going to minutes, and then multiplying that rate by your conversion factor and going to hours. Now in this case we multiplied by 60 twice because there's 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. Most of the time this will not be the case though. Think of cups, quarts, and gallons. All those are different. So you're not always going to be multiplying by that same number twice. You have to think of what your conversion factors are. Alright, so part 3, how many miles did the runner travel in 1 hour? Round your response to the nearest tenth. So right now we're working in yards. We want to know the number of miles. So I need to know my conversion factor, again, for yards to miles. First, let's set up our sentence. So our sentence would be, he would have run blank miles in 1 hour. So since I have my rate right here of 33,948 yards in 1 hour, I don't have to do anything to convert the time. I have to convert the number of yards. Well, the conversion here would be that for every 1 mile, you have 1,760 yards. So again, since we want to go from yards to miles, then I have to put miles to yards on the top. Even though we have hour down here, even though that's our rate, we are still going to use the mile on top and the yards on bottom. Okay, so these labels cancel each other out, so we have yards and yards that cancel each other out. So if you look here, we end up with 33,948 miles on top over 1,760 yards. When you divide this, because this means division, you end up with 19 3/10 miles with rounding per 1 hour. So he would run 19 3/10 miles in 1 hour. I know this can be complicated and you really have to practice and make sure you're using the right conversion factors. Don't worry, you will get lots of practice in class tomorrow. Okay. So for now, what I'd like you to do is I would like you to look at this next one and I want you to try it on your own, and when you come back, we'll go over your answer. Alright, so it's important to know that it was on cruise control. That means it's a constant rate at 65 miles per hour. So there's your rate, and you went for 3 hours without stopping. How far did I go? My sentence would be, I went blank miles. I would know that it's miles because of my label right here. I have to use 65, and I would have to use 3. So I know that I'm going 65 miles per hour, and I'm going to multiply that by the 3 hours that I drove. My hours and hours cancel each other out. I put the 3 over 1 because it's a whole number. And when I multiply 65 times 3, I get 195, and I'm only left with miles. So my answer is 195 miles. All right, so what I'd like you to do, I know this is a little bit tougher one, but I'd like you to do exercise 2 on your own. Make sure to highlight, underline, and box. Make sure that you are showing your work, writing your sentence, and writing down any questions that you have. So that way when we get into class, you can ask those questions, and we can make sure to have you ready to go so you can practice more of these in class the next day.